Hello and welcome, SEDA College students. It's great to see you here today. I'm Jane. I'm really happy that you're here. I'm really glad that you guys are all working so hard and doing your best to learn English, regardless of what else is going on. Keep it up. Please keep coming online, and well done for being here today. So, my plan over the next 2 days is to talk about tips for improving your writing. So today we're going to do part 1, and then tomorrow we're going to do part 2. I've only got 5 tips, so it's not like I've got so much, but I just thought that we'd sort of put it into 2 groups so that you can actually focus on a little bit about what I'm trying to tell you to do with improving your writing. So I've seen a lot of writing, corrected a lot of writing in my time, and sometimes people give me writing and I just cannot understand it. And then I look at it and I think, why can I not understand it? And one of the main issues I think is I can't understand their punctuation. Another tip is to make your sentences shorter. Another one is to think about paragraphs. Another one is to learn linking words and discourse markers, and then to practice, So those are my 5 points. Look at your punctuation, make your sentences shorter, think about your paragraphs, learn your linking words and discourse markers, and practice your writing. So today we're just going to talk about looking at your punctuation, making your sentences shorter, and thinking about your paragraphs. And then tomorrow we'll talk about linking words and practicing your writing. So looking at your punctuation, as I was saying, very often, like I am thinking of writing that I've corrected, and you take a look at it and you're just like, whoa, I do not understand this writing. It's terrible. And then when I actually think about it, it isn't terrible. It's just that there's no punctuation in it. So there's like a disregard for capital letters, a disregard for full stops, and a lack of commas and any other punctuation. So I'm just trying to say now, put you in my shoes and look at this piece of writing here and tell me, like, can you read it? Can you understand it? And I think the answer is no, and I can't read it to you because either I have to, when I read it, put the punctuation in, or else I have to read it in a completely nonsensical way, because there are no natural breaks. These are just random words all thrown into a line. So take a minute and see if you can work out, where do you put in the full stops and the capital letters after them? Where do you put in the commas? I'm just going to wait for a minute to see if you can take a look at that. It's an interesting challenge, So maybe you can pause this video and then just have a try. Okay, are you ready now? Let's go. So here we are. Punctuation in the English language helps the reader to understand a sentence through visual means other than just the letters of the alphabet. Full stop. English punctuation has always had 2 complementary aspects. On the one hand, phonological punctuation linked to how sentences can be read aloud, particularly to pausing, and on the other hand, grammatical punctuation linked to the structure of the sentence. You can think of it like the importance of intonation when speaking. Without it, the reading text is really hard to understand. So I hope you can see there that when you break that into 4 sentences using punctuation, you have some meaning. The meaning is back there. Full stops and capital letters, commas, colons and semicolons, don't forget. My next tip is to make your sentences shorter. So this is an interesting problem, and what I think is that people have the idea that short sentences are not sophisticated, and they have the idea that the longer the sentence, the cleverer you are as a writer. But in fact, that's not true. And English is known as a language for science, for international communication, for clarity of message. And if you're writing really, really long sentences, you're just not going to get there. You need to write language, in written language that people understand. And if people understand what you're saying, then they're happy. They don't care if your sentences are long or short. They care if they can understand them. And if you write long sentences, then you just become, there's an enormous risk that your meaning is going to get lost. So before we start, I just want to ask you a question now. What do you think is the difference between spoken and written discourse? Like when you speak something and when you write it down, what's the difference? Like, how does the language look? Well, what I want to say is that when you speak, your audience is there with you. And so they interact with you, and they let you know if they understand you or not. You know, they give you feedback cues, we call them. You can look at them in the face. You can see if they're concentrating. You can see if they're understanding. They say, and then they ask you questions. And all these things help you to realize if your message is getting through or not. Now, obviously, like today, right now, I don't know if your message is getting through. So your audience isn't always with you if you're giving a monologue. But that's one point. Another point is that you use intonation when you speak. So when you change topic, you use different intonation. You stress words by making them louder. You take little breaks. Well, we've got that here. You take breaks and you stop. You start. You return again. And actually, another thing is that when we speak, we tend to just link ideas. So it's called an utterance. It's not called a sentence. So we say something, and then we say something else, and then we say something else, and then we say something else, and then something else, and then something else, and then something else. And so basically it seems like one long sentence because you keep on saying and. But the truth is that it's not, because we don't speak in sentences, we speak in utterances. And so there's no direct correlation. So I feel that maybe when you're thinking about writing, you hear in your head what you would say, and then you write it down. And you forget that actually what you hear in your head is an utterance. It's not a sentence. So you need to formalize what you hear in your head, what you would speak if you were going to say it. You need to formalize that and structure it so that the audience, that the reader can understand what you're saying, and that it's tidy according to grammatical rules that you can follow when you don't have intonation, when you don't have the speaker there, or the listener ready to give you cues to show if they understand what you're saying or not. So as we say, grammatically when you speak in utterances, not sentences. They're more fluid, they don't follow grammatical rules to the same extent as written language, and ideas are often linked with words like and. So if you write them down, it looks like you have a long sentence, but you shouldn't write them down. That's the point. Don't write them down. Fix your grammar, fix your signposting, make your sentences shorter, and then people will be able to understand them. So now my question is that in your head you have a sentence that goes on and on and on and on, and then another one that goes on, and then you have a new idea, and then a new idea, and you just keep saying and. So how do you know when you try to change this language that you hear in your head that you would speak? How do you know how to change that into a written sentence? Well, what I want to say to you is that you should go back to lesson 1. And lesson 1 about basic English sentence structure, do you remember what that is? Like, it's so simple that you'll be just like, I'm not interested in this, this is too obvious. But basically you have your subject, you have your verb, and then you have your extension, and that's your sentence. So you just need to go back to that. So we've got these sentences now that we looked at already. We were looking at there when we're talking about punctuation in the English language, helps the reader to understand a sentence through visual means other than just the letters of the alphabet. We read this already. English punctuation has always had two complementary aspects. On the one hand, phonological pronunciation linked to how the sentence can be read aloud, particularly to pausing, and on the other hand, grammatical punctuation linked to the structure of the sentence. You can think of it like the importance of intonation when speaking. Without it, the reading text is really hard to understand. Okay, so we have this little bit of text. So I just wanted to analyze this in terms of sentence structure to show you that simple lesson is still in play, and that is how you make your language comprehensible. So first of all, let's look at each sentence and pick out the subject of each sentence. So we have 4 sentences, and as you can see, the subject is at the beginning of each sentence. Punctuation in the English language helps the reader to understand the sentence through visual means other than just the letters of the alphabet. So punctuation is the subject, or punctuation in the English language maybe actually would be more accurate. That's the whole thing, punctuation in the English language. Then comes the verb, helps the reader to understand, and helps is the verb, and then the reader to understand the sentence through visual means other than just letters of the alphabet is just the rest. So that's what you want. You want your subject, you want your verb, and then the extension, whatever that might be. With each of these 4 sentences, it's the same. English punctuation is the subject, and then let's look. So we look at the verbs. So punctuation helps the reader to understand. English punctuation has always had 2 complementary aspects. On one hand, punctuation linked to how the sentences can be read aloud, particularly to pausing. On the other hand, grammatical punctuation linked to the structure of the sentence. So I don't know if you're going to ask me, well, look, in that long sentence, there is another verb there, linked. But the point is that that's used as part of a phrase because it's not, it is linked. There's no subject there. Well, it doesn't say phonological punctuation is linked to how the sentence can be read aloud. You said we have phonological punctuation linked to how the sentence can be read aloud. So that whole thing is like a noun phrase. And on the other hand, we have grammatical punctuation linked to the structure of the sentence. That's the second noun phrase. So yes, it's complex writing, but the basic structure of the sentence is there. You've got your subject, you've got your verb, and then you've got your extension. And you don't have, if you notice in those, you don't have any and clauses. You just have one subject, one verb, one main verb, and then you have your extension, whatever it is that the verb is talking about in relation to the subject. So don't forget, subject, verb, extension. And sometimes I see people putting in verbs without subjects, and it doesn't work in English. You have to have your subject, then you have to have your verb, and then you have to have whatever they're doing. So sometimes you want to have more than one subject in a sentence. Like, I love swimming, but my friend Elizabeth always wants to go riding. So, that is actually sort of lesson number 2 in sentence writing, where you combine 2 short sentences with a connector such as and but. So yeah, you can do this. But the point is just that if you start to make the sentence longer and you start to make long extensions to those 2 subjects, there's me that loves swimming and my friend Elizabeth that goes riding. If you've got 2 subjects and then you try to make a really long sentence, you just risk everything getting confused. Like, it's possible that you can do it, but it's possible that you will just lose your reader. So therefore, just make your sentences shorter so that we always know who's the subject and what is the main verb. If we know who the subject is and we know what the main verb is, we can understand the rest of the sentence. So just remember that writing gets messy when you try to put long extensions into sentences that have 2 subjects. very quickly the reader doesn't know what the point of the sentence is, and meaning breaks down. So the third thing, and the last thing that I want to talk about today, is then paragraphs. So like if you think about your spoken utterance, every now and again you take a moment of silence, or like a new breathing, a moment to breathe, and you change your intonation, and that shows that you have a new idea, that you're taking a new approach. Well, instead of thinking of this as a new sentence, because maybe you say and because and then you start again, that doesn't mean that your breath is a new sentence. Your breath is possibly a new paragraph. So think of it like that. So you just want to think one idea, one paragraph. Not one idea, one sentence. One idea, one paragraph. So I'd just like to ask you, do you know what a lead sentence is? Yeah, so it's the first sentence of a paragraph. And what's significant about the lead sentence? Yeah, it contains the main idea of the paragraph. And like this is really interesting when you read newspaper articles or anything like that, because they say about a newspaper article that a lot of people don't read the whole article. They read maybe the first paragraph to find out what it's about. Then they skim through all the lead sentences all the way through the paragraph, all the way through the article, to find out like what are the main ideas here. And then they read the conclusion. And that's a kind of a normal way that people read newspapers. And the point is that then if you're a journalist writing for a newspaper, you have to realize that if you want to captivate your audience, you have to put an interesting sentence at the beginning of every paragraph so that the reader will keep reading them. And then when the reader says, oh yeah, this is really interesting, then they stop, slow down and read the whole article. So they say, all right, I see the lead sentence, that looks interesting. Let's read the support sentences. Let's try to understand why this person is writing this and, understand their meaning. So that's why the structure is so important, because you quickly just look at the top sentence of each paragraph, gives you the basic idea of what they're talking about, and then you can read it more thoroughly. And even if you are saying, well, I'm definitely going to read this whole thing, every time it's introduced with a new idea, support, lead sentence, new idea, support. And that's the way you understand what's going on when you're developing an argument or developing a story. So that should be your sort of rule when you're thinking about a paragraph, is you have your first sentence, main idea, and then this is followed by 1 or 2 or 3 support sentences. Sometimes you have just one lead sentence on its own. It's like arguably, it sits there. You see writing with just one sentence. But often you kind of like to give it like a friend, give it 1 support sentence or 2 or 3, and then go again with a new idea, new paragraph. Then like you have your concluding sentence, depending on, sometimes the support sentences, do they round up? They can do that too. So the idea is that you remember one idea, 1 paragraph. That's the point. So I've just got some writing here about the importance of paragraphs in IELTS writing. And so I wanted to look at this because the content is interesting, but not just that, also because if you look at the paragraphs in the writing of this writing about paragraphs. So paragraphs are so important in writing. Good paragraphing helps the reader understand and enjoy your writing. That's your lead sentence. And then good ideas are not enough to write a good essay. They need to be organized so that they make sense. There's your support sentence. Paragraphs are important. They help you to understand the writing. And then if you're writing, if you have good ideas, that's not enough if people don't understand your ideas. So good writing has to have good ideas, that are well expressed. And that's what I'm trying to say, is that it like if you have a good idea and you express it in a simple way, then that's brilliant. If you have a good idea and you express it in such a complicated way that it's inaccessible, that's not cool. So paragraph 2, I constantly tell my students, new ideas, new paragraph. Keeping one idea to one paragraph is the most basic rule of good paragraphing. If you find yourself moving into a new idea, stop and get ready to write a new paragraph. So there we have 3 sentences, 2 support sentences, and a nice short one. I constantly tell my students, new ideas, new paragraph. Finished. Lovely and short. Keeping one idea to one paragraph is the most basic rule of good paragraphing. Nice short sentence. If you find yourself moving into a new idea, stop and get ready to write a new paragraph. So you can see that if you were speaking, you might just put and between all those words if it was an utterance, but it's not an utterance. It's writing one sentence, one verb, one subject, one extension, short sentences, and then paragraphs. So the next paragraph. In a paragraph, you might have several pieces of supporting evidence for the one idea. You might even have several points. If you do have several points, however, they must be related to the main idea or topic of the paragraph. If these points start to get too long, it's probably a good idea to give each point its own paragraph to discuss it further. You've got to constantly think about your reader and if they're going to feel like they're getting lost in the information. So yes, like you have an overall idea, but then you set up your overall idea and then you break it down and discuss it in smaller bite sizes. And so each of those bite-sized smaller ideas gets its own paragraph. And if it doesn't deserve a paragraph, well, maybe it's not important. So let's go on, says this piece of text here, and look at the structure of the following paragraph. So the topic sentence. The topic sentence has 2 functions. This is your lead sentence in the paragraph that we're talking about. The very first sentence of each paragraph. It generates interest so that the reader wants to read on, and it states the main idea of the paragraph. So here's an example sentence. The IELTS test has now become the most popular test for people of non-English speaking background to enter university or to immigrate to an English speaking country. There is a lead sentence. It generates interest. Oh, we're talking about IELTS, it's popular. And it states the main idea that it's about doing IELTS to enter university or immigrate to an English-speaking country. Then you've got support sentences. You need like 1 or 2, possibly 3. The first support sentence we have here is that these sentences support the main idea, stating that the main idea from the topic sentence. So, universities in English-speaking countries respect how through the IELTS test, respect how thorough the IELTS test is and feel that if a student achieves a good academic IELTS test score, this reflects their ability to study in the medium of the English language. Great, so let's look at subject, verb, object. Universities in English-speaking countries is your subject. Respect is the verb. And then the extension is how thoroughly the IELTS test is. And then you have and feel. So now we're back onto the universities as the subject. Feel. So we've got universities and English-speaking countries. Respect is your verb number 1, how thoroughly the IELTS test is. And universities and English-speaking countries feel is your second verb, that if a student achieves a good academic IELTS score, this reflects their abilities to study in the medium of the English language. So it's a complex sentence in that you've got 2 verbs, but you've still only got 1 subject. And so it's still understandable because you've got your basic structure, subject, verb, extension. This one goes subject, verb, extension, verb, extension. And then your second supporting sentence, governments in English-speaking countries recognise the general training IELTS as a test as an excellent way of assessing English language skills of someone applying to immigrate. Many people have gone on to start a new life in the UK, Australia, New Zealand or Canada after achieving a good score in general training IELTS. So there's actually 2 supporting sentences there in the Annex 3. So like our first subject, the sentence of the first subject is universities in English-speaking countries, and now the next one is governments in English-speaking countries. That's the noun, the subject, and then the verb recognise the general training IELTS test as an excellent way of assessing English language skills of someone applying to immigrate. That's your extension. And then another sentence, new subject, many people, verb, have gone on, phrasal verb, gone on to start. Maybe if you want to look at the whole thing as a noun, a verb, like a phrasal verb, have gone on to start a new life in UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada after achieving a good score in general training IELTS. So you still have, all the time, you have your sentence that's got its subject, verb, extension, and you've got one idea in one paragraph. And then the last, now here we've got a concluding sentence, which, like, it depends where you are in your writing. If you always have a concluding sentence, it can reflect on what you've talked about, it can restate the topic sentence, and it can leave the reader with something to think about. The usefulness of IELTS for education and immigration probably explains why IELTS tested over 3.5 million candidates in 2018. So it's a huge test, isn't it? And if you look at that sentence, the usefulness of IELTS for education and immigration is your subject, explains is the verb, and why IELTS tested over 3.5 million candidates in 2018 is the extension. So your verb structure has to be there, your sentence structure has to be there, and your paragraph structure has to be there as well. So that's really all I wanted to say to you today. Look at your punctuation and just remember that if your sentence doesn't have capital letters and full stops, it's a disaster for us. Just remember that a comma is not the same as a full stop. Sometimes people write and they just put commas in and they think that we should be able to understand with commas, but we can't, because we need subject, verb, extension, full stop. Subject, verb, extension, full stop. And the commas are just breathing spaces within that construction. And it's essential that you don't mix a comma for a full stop. It's also essential that you remember your capital letters, because otherwise we just can't follow that writing. Make your sentences shorter. Don't make them complicated. Don't say and. Just realize that those ands that you hear in your head are part of like oral language that are called utterances. They're not sentences. And just be disciplined and say, okay, I've got a subject, I've got a verb, I've got an extension. Now I'm going to have a full stop. I'm going to keep my sentences short. Think about paragraphs. Think about how one paragraph has one idea. The point is that when you write, you take time to write. You just don't write in a big hurry. And so you require that the reader expects you to structure your writing so that it's logical and organized, because it's an effort for them to read it as well. So you don't want to waste their time, the reader, by just slapping all this stuff down that you haven't really thought about yourself. You need to think about it, structure it, and deliver it in a way that is comprehensible to them. And if you think about it, that's about respect as well. Is that why would you throw your ideas down in a way that is not the way you haven't thought about it, and expect them to pick them up and organize them into a way where they can understand them? That's your job as the writer. It's not their job as the reader to try to sort out the muddle that is your thought. if you haven't done that before you start writing. So think about your paragraphs. One paragraph, one idea. So tomorrow I'm just going to talk about linking words and discourse markers. And I'm also going to talk about practicing your writing. But that's it for today. So thank you very much for your time and for your attention. Please do hear what I'm saying. It will make your teacher's life so much easier if you follow these, look at your punctuation, make your sentence shorter, and think about your paragraphing. And before you hand in a piece of writing, just look at it. Is this one mass of writing that is completely indigestible, or is this tidy, broken down into sections with paragraph with a new header and a few sentences so you can understand one concept? So paragraph, 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 concept, concept, concept. I guess think of it like eating your dinner. You don't want everything all mixed up together, your ice cream with your gravy. You want to have it separated out so that you can enjoy it. Well, your writing should be the same way. So thanks very much for your attention. Thanks for listening to part 1, and please make sure that you come tomorrow for part 2. I look forward to seeing you then. Okay, bye.